Hey everyone, welcome. I am absolutely thrilled you're joining us today because we have a truly mind-bending explainer lined up for you. We're going to be exploring a highly provocative alternative to traditional psychodiagnostics, unpacking the concepts of Konstantin Razumowski. He introduces this fascinating framework called living astropsychogenetics. Basically, it's a concept that merges deep esoteric traditions with modern psychological rehabilitation, and in doing so, it totally challenges the very foundation of how we view the mind, the body, and the universe. I know, it sounds deep and it definitely is complex, but I promise you, by the end of this explainer, you are going to have a crystal clear understanding of this entirely different way of looking at human consciousness.
Okay, let's dive right into this. Here's our roadmap for today. We're going to start by shifting the scientific paradigm, then we'll compare biological hardware to cosmic software. After that, we'll look at snapshots versus lifelong movies, decode the psi genome, explore holistic psychological rehabilitation, and finally, we'll neutrally examine the boundaries of measurement.
All right, starting us off with Section 1, Shifting the Scientific Paradigm.
To truly wrap our heads around Razumowski's approach, we first really need to recognize the fundamental clash between modern quantum mechanics, which is heavily rooted in a strict materialistic worldview, and this older, esoteric, traditionalist paradigm. The source actually describes Razumowski's approach as a reverse Copernican revolution. So what does that actually mean? Well, instead of trying to force the deeply irrational, messy nature of the human spirit into the rigid physical formulas of modern science, Razumowski simply flips the whole pyramid upside down. In this model, mind and creationism are primary. They come first. Matter is just a downstream consequence of them. It's a massive shift because it completely bypasses the dead ends of classical materialism by placing the mind at the very origin of, well, everything.
And this brings us to a kind of dense but absolutely critical term, panpsychism. Basically, this is the concept that the entire universe is inherently charged with psychic energy. You see, modern physics often hits a wall trying to explain the evolutionary paradox of how conscious thought could somehow accidentally pop out of dead, subatomic particles over billions of years. Panpsychism, it just removes that paradox entirely. It suggests that consciousness was literally always there. Under this lens, you and I aren't just biological machines, or as they sometimes say, meat computers. No, we are local focuses of a vast cosmic consciousness.
Moving right along to Section 2, Hardware versus Cosmic Software. That philosophical shift we just talked about leads us perfectly into how this paradigm attempts to solve that age-old psychophysical problem of the brain versus the soul. The source uses a really striking, brilliant metaphor here. The brain is not a thought generator, but a biological TV receiver. Think about that. In modern neurobiology, the brain trying to study itself often creates this frustrating logical loop. But by introducing the soul as the higher operator, the brain is simply reframed as a highly complex interface. The soul is the one broadcasting the signal, and your physical brain, it just receives it.
Let's break that metaphor down because it makes the comparison incredibly clear. On one side, we have our hardware, our physical DNA, and the actual physiology of our brain, essentially the kinetic tubes, the screen, and the wires of the television set. Then on the other side, we have the software, the soul as the higher operator, and what the source calls psi DNA, which basically acts as the channel tuners. So if the TV is glitching out, a holistic therapist acting as a technician doesn't just try to fix the physical screen. They also have to tune the energetic antenna to the right broadcast frequency.
All right, Section 3, Snapshots versus lifelong movies.
So how does modern science actually measure the mind compared to this cosmic model? Well, just look at that number for a second. Over 70,000. That is the estimated number of official scientific diagnostic tests globally. It's wild, right? This massive figure vividly illustrates the extreme fragmentation of modern science as it frantically attempts to chop the human psyche into thousands of tiny, separate, measurable parameters.
Now, these 70,000 tests generally fall into a few narrow scientific categories. You've got personality questionnaires like the MMPI, clinical scales for things like depression and anxiety, intellectual assessments, and projective methods like those famous Rorschach ink blots. But here is a truly striking detail from the source. Out of those tens of thousands of tests, only about 5 to 10% have actually passed strict scientific validation. On top of that, most of them rely heavily on subjective self-reflection, where a patient might just answer with what they think is the correct or normal response.
And this brilliantly illustrates the core difference between the two approaches. Classical diagnostic tests are basically just static photographs. They capture a here-and-now snapshot that can be heavily distorted by whatever temporary mood, stress, or exhaustion the patient is feeling on that specific day. In stark contrast, Razumowski's Astropsychogenetics aims to be a dynamic, lifelong video. By using objective birth data to map a natal chart, it seeks to observe a person's entire fundamental potential in motion, showing how their character might naturally grow, shift, and change through different life cycles.
Which brings us to Section 4, Decoding the Psi Genome.
So what is actually playing in this lifelong video? To decode this, we have to look at another huge metaphysical leap, the concept of anima mundi, or the soul of the world. See, in classical physics, time is just a strict thermodynamic arrow pointing straight toward entropy and decay. But here, time is viewed as the living, breathing psyche of the universe. It is the literal process of cosmic consciousness unfolding. Under this logic, astrological cycles and planetary transits aren't just invisible gravity affecting rocks in space. They are the actual pulse or changing moods of the world's soul, syncing directly with human rhythms.
Now, you might be thinking this all sounds a bit random, but actually, these esoteric concepts are built on massive, centuries-long statistical observations of the biosphere. We're talking ancient history here. Babylon and Egypt linked eclipses to human behavior. Ancient China developed the I Ching system tracking natural biorhythms. The Maya built incredibly complex calendars to forecast psychotypes. The source argues that this living statistics base from ancient cultures represents a vast empirical diagnostic method that has been carefully refined over millennia. It's not just guesswork, it's deep observation.
Okay, let's get practical in Section 5, Holistic Psychological Rehabilitation.
So, how do we actually use this ancient statistical base today? The primary goal is hyper-personalized rehabilitation, particularly for things like severe stress, trauma, or burnout. Step 1. The therapist identifies hidden psychosomatic roots, perhaps uncovering an inherited program hidden in that psi DNA we mentioned. Step 2. They sync the therapies with the patient's chronorhythmic calendars. Basically, this means scheduling intense therapies or physical loads during periods of cosmic energetic peaks and focusing purely on soft relaxation during the natural energetic dips. Step 3. They reprogram destructive stress reactions. And Step 4. They tie it all together in a comprehensive, holistic mind-body approach.
And here's why this matters so much for the actual person seeking help. It is all about the direct therapeutic action of symbols. The human brain and psyche naturally speak the language of archetypes. So when a therapist uses ancient metaphors, like, say, calming an angry Mars in the body, the subconscious instantly processes it. It completely bypasses the logical, critical barrier of the conscious mind to immediately lower stress. Most importantly, though, it removes the patient's guilt. The illness is reframed. It's no longer seen as a broken biological machine that's somehow their fault, but simply as a temporary desynchronization with the cosmic rhythm.
Finally, let's look at Section 6, the boundaries of measurement. Of course, an explainer on this topic wouldn't be complete without addressing the scientific elephant in the room, right? As the source neutrally points out, from the strict perspective of evidence-based medicine, concepts like psi DNA and Astropsychogenetics do not have a verifiable laboratory base. The scientific method has very strict limits. Phenomena absolutely must be measurable by physical instruments. They have to be repeatable under identical conditions anywhere in the world, and they must be falsifiable. Modern silicon and digital lab equipment simply cannot detect subtle, psychic information structures. The source actually draws a fascinating parallel to theological concepts here, noting that just as the creator cannot be measured by the creation, cosmic software cannot be seen by physical hardware.
So, the crucial point really comes down to this exact contrast. Science operates strictly in the realm of laboratory proof, physical atoms, and repeatable data. But for the individual undergoing rehabilitation, their focus is entirely on subjective human experience. If a patient uses this method as a psychological map and it brings them real personal relief, removes their psychosomatic pain, and ultimately makes them feel whole again, then for them, that subjective healing becomes an objective reality, totally regardless of what the lab reports might say.
Which leaves us with this final, really provocative thought. Does a method truly need lab proof to be effective, or is subjective healing its own reality? It is such a delicate balance between hard science and holistic self-discovery, and honestly, a wildly fascinating lens through which to view the incredible complexity of the human mind. Thank you so much for joining me to explore these concepts today. I really hope this explainer sparked your curiosity and maybe gave you a brand new way to think about the universe within you. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll see you next time.